You have restored power to the village and guaranteed my re-election. And for that, my boy, you've earned a power cell.
Apologies in advance for the long-winded intro, but I think it's kind of important I give it for the sake of giving you a perspective on this. See, I didn't get into playing Sony consoles for the longest time. I've still never touched an actual original PlayStation, and I didn't even get to start playing Sony consoles until like 3/4 the way through the PS3 life cycle. So I don't really have any experience with any Sony mascot games. Like, I've never played Crash Bandicoot or Spyro the Dragon, Tomb Raider, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, or Jak and Daxter. At least until about this point, when I saw all 3 of the PS2 platforming trilogies were available digitally on PSN for a discount because they were on sale. And I figured, you know, here's a good place to jump in, let's go. So here it is, Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, the first Jak and Daxter game. And I'm doing this one before all the others because, well, it was the only one my PS3 had downloaded because for whatever reason my PS3 downloads stuff obnoxiously slowly. And it's only my PS3, I mean my Xbox 360 does it fine, so does like my PS4, so does my Xbox One. Just my PS3, for whatever reason, super slow. Not the point. Anyway, Jak and Daxter is the story of the titular Jak and Daxter. Being the young adventurous youths they are, they disobey all the rules and go explore the nearby Misty Island, which ends with the duo hearing something they probably shouldn't, and Daxter taking a bath in a pool of dark energy, turning him into a weird weasel otter thing. And now the duo have to work together to collect a bunch of things from a bunch of different people to open up a bunch of different convoluted doors and ultimately fight the final boss, save the world, and figure out what the Precursor Legacy really was. Although, yeah, I don't think they really talk too much about what the actual Precursor Legacy is, so the title's a bit misleading, I think. Overall, the story is pretty solid, although there isn't really all that much to it. You get small little interstitial bits of story with each of the different NPCs you interact with, while they give you your little sub-quests to get to your power cells so that you can move on in the game. But other than that, the only story segments you get are in between the different various hubs you go to in the world. So there's not a lot of story here, but what they do give you is pretty well written. And I think more importantly from a story perspective is the characters, because the individual NPC characters you talk to are memorable and unique. You only really ever see each one like once for some reason, but more importantly, the titular duo of Jak and Daxter are fantastically written. Well, half of them are anyway. Because Daxter is loud, obnoxious, and really just kind of a slacker who likes to make jokes at everyone's expense, and is absolutely the perfect foil for Jak, who is completely mute. But the important thing to take away from this is while Jak doesn't have a voice, that doesn't mean he's a blank character you can just sort of insert yourself into as a player's surrogate character. No, he very much has his own character, and surprisingly, it's deeper than most characters today. He just doesn't say a word. Instead, he's a very expressive character. You see him in every cutscene with his various facial expressions. You see what's going on through his head, and you can really glean a lot of his character from him. You can see that, yeah, he's a hero who wants to do the right thing at every possible turning and can't stand seeing injustice. But at the same time, you can see that he's a kid who's very mischievous and would love to take a break and play a prank on his best friend. You can see that when the two interact with their mechanic friend, they sort of have a rivalry going for her affection. You can see that Jak is very clearly in this to be a hero, but he's still a kid and he still has his own personality and he still doesn't take things too seriously. And this is really impressive because despite the fact that Naughty Dog did not give Jak a voice, they gave him a personality. And that's really hard to do because, well, you don't see that ever. Because everyone's more focused on quite the opposite, giving the character a voice, but no real personality. And you see it all the time nowadays, which is frustrating beyond all measure. So you know what? I gotta give props to Naughty Dog for the character of Jak and Daxter, because not only do they have an awesome sort of relationship, and you can just sort of see their friendship as you play and how they play off each other, but you also get to see a lot of Jak as a character without ever hearing a word from him, and you don't see that often, and it was just excellently done. Now, the gameplay to Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, is excellent, which is fantastic because this is the first Sony mascot game I've gotten to play. It left a really good impression on me. Basically, the core concept is you run around taking little side quests and going to various areas to complete various objectives, whether you're told to or not, and completing them awards you with a power cell. You collect enough power cells, you can then power a machine that will get you past the next area. There's also a bunch of little rust-colored orbs that you need to collect a bunch of to turn into power cells later, because greed is a thing. But I think the core of the gameplay is definitely the platforming. What's most impressive about it is while the focus is definitely on the platforming, and it's very excellent platforming, mind you, they're willing to break it up with fun little minigame type things. Like, you get segments where you're riding your little hover bike, or helping catch fish, or riding a giant bird. There's a bunch of different things that help break up the basic platforming, but it was also excellently done because they don't feel out of place, and they don't make the platforming in between feel stale or boring. I think the time between the two is excellently done, and I think overall it was pretty masterful, and that's not a term I like to throw around all that often. Now, while I do like the platforming, and I do like the game, and I do like the levels, there is a grand total of one thing I dislike about this game, and it is with one of the levels. That is the Dark Spider Cave level. That level is awful, and whoever is responsible for this being in the final game needs to be fired into a black hole. Because it is dark, it is miserable, and I hate that level so much. The only other thing I can maybe complain about is, I kinda wish your character had 4 hit points instead of 3, but even then, with 3 hit points, you can get through pretty much everything. Death really doesn't have all that much of an actual impact, other than resetting you to the previous checkpoint, so there's not really much of a reason to complain about that, but it is something I found a little bit frustrating. But yeah, it's a pretty solid game. You run around, you jump on platforms, you punch enemies in the face, you collect things, you move on, you beat the final boss, you win the game. And, you know, I have to say, right here, right now, this game did something pretty special that I haven't gotten to experience in a long time. See, the gameplay was so good that I sat down, I started recording some of this, I started playing. The next thing I know, it's 8 hours later, and I had 100% cleared the game. I had lost track of time. I had just had so much fun that I 100% completed in one session, and I don't do that often. It takes quite a fun, quite an engrossing, quite a magical game to get me to do that, and Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, did that to me. And honestly, I think that's about as high a praise as I could ever give this game, is I lost complete track of time. I was having so much fun, I beat it in one sitting. So, yeah, pretty good game. Now, the overall presentation to Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, is excellent. The characters are full of personality. I've already talked about how expressive the characters are, specifically Jak, and that makes him even more an engrossing character, especially because he hasn't gotten a voice. I know I've talked about this already. And there's just a lot of different enemies. The environments work pretty well. Although I think they do get a lot less colorful and a lot less interesting as time goes on. There's still some nice ones, such as the ice level and the underwater ruins. I really like those 2 levels in particular. Again, the only level I don't really care for in terms of really anything is the dark cave level. That level could get scrapped and I don't think anyone would miss it. From an audio perspective, likewise, pretty solid. The voice acting works for what it needs to do. Sure, Daxter's a little bit obnoxious, but, you know, he's supposed to be. He's your sort of loud, obnoxious foil character to your silent protagonist. It works for what it needs to do, and honestly, I think all the voice actors worked hard and did a really good job with this one. The only thing I don't care much for in terms of the voice acting, and I know this is sort of a thing you kind of either have to do or you have a bunch of NPCs with no personality, but pretty much every NPC you run into has one defining character trait, and it comes across both in the voice acting and just their character design, and that feels a little bit lazy, but at the same time, we're talking about NPC characters that get introduced and then immediately never interacted with again 5 minutes later, so I get that there's not really much you could have done with that. Overall, I think the presentation to Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, is pretty excellent, and I know that's a term you're hearing a lot of, but seriously, this is a really quality game. It's super good. Now, if you want to get a copy of Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, well, it's a Sony mascot character, so there were tons and tons and tons of copies made. You can get this game for very little money. Currently, the lowest one I'm seeing on eBay is $2. You can also get it on the Jak and Daxter collection on the PS3, both physical and digital, which is what I've got it on, although this is the only one that's downloaded at this point. And I gotta say, this game makes me really hopeful for the rest of the Sony mascot platformers I haven't played out there. And it does make me kind of want to go out and try and get the PS1 games as well. But overall, Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy, easy to get a hold of, dirt cheap, and game is awesome. Seriously, this game is an awesome game, and I think, honestly, if you like platformers and you've got access to a PS2 or a PS3 or any other way to play this game, you should, because it's just an excellent, well put together game. So, Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy comes highly recommended.
Step 1, stay alive. Step 2, think about not doing something like that again!